How much do you know about the relationship between Skylab and Western Australia? If you answered not much, don't worry. That information isn't that easy to come by. My name is Dwight Stephen Boniecki. I'm a filmmaker, book author, and researcher of really cool, obscure space history. Let me ignite your passion. I grew up in the years following the last footsteps taken on the lunar surface. One of my earliest recollections is watching Jack Schmitt and Gene Cernan walking on the surface of the moon, and later that day my father taking me outside and pointing up to the moon and asking me if I could see the astronauts walking on there. I can tell you, it was exciting to live in a world where science fiction was becoming science fact.
I think the main thing was that we were really putting up a space station. Many of us, including myself, were sci-fi fans, reading science fiction from an early age, tales of space station operations, and finally we were going to put something up that men could actually live with.
Well, Skylab is the name given to an older program that we had called Apollo Applications, and we have attempted to take Apollo hardware and make a prototype space station with it. And in doing so, we took the third stage of a Saturn V and we've made it into an orbiting laboratory, and it's really the United States' first attempt at a orbiting space station.
But it didn't stop there. There was talk of going to Mars. The space shuttle was being developed right in front of my eyes. I was watching updates on the news pretty much every single day as far as I can remember. It looked like NASA was unstoppable.
We have ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And we have a liftoff. The Skylab lifting off the pad now, moving up. Skylab has cleared the tower. Houston is now controlling. 18 seconds, pitch and roll program started. Saturn now maneuvering to its proper flight path attitude. Mark 25 seconds. 8 seconds.
But the harsh environment of space threw a multitude of hurdles in NASA and Skylab's path. And yet they managed to overcome each and every one of these hurdles. Three groups of 3 astronauts visited Skylab for durations of 28 days, 59 days, and 84 days respectively. They conducted experiments, observed the Sun, and observed planet Earth.
How would you like the people of the world to think of your mission, the last Skylab mission? Over.
I think I'd like people to think of our mission as one where 3 guys went up and set up housekeeping and tried to live a normal life in space to show that it could be done, that man can live a normal existence in space, and that he can accomplish a great many things while he's living up here that just can't be done on the ground.
After they left, they took the data with them, but they left the space station to orbit the Earth in the hope of maybe visiting it someday, perhaps with the space shuttle. Greater than expected solar activity affected the outer layers of Earth's atmosphere, resulting in excessive drag placed upon Skylab, which ultimately meant that its orbit was starting to decline.
And at a certain point in time, Skylab started appearing on what we call the decay list. It was within maybe a couple of years or a year. It varies based on the type of data we get, how accurate it is. And so it became this object of interest that seemed to be in this prediction program coming down sooner than what NASA was predicting.
NASA got to work immediately to try and find a solution to keep Skylab in a stable orbit. and that relied on the space shuttle flying up prior to 1979 and boosting via a remote control device, boosting Skylab into a higher, more stable orbit, which then future shuttle crews could go and visit. Unfortunately, budget restrictions caused the cancellation of this proposal, and once that decision was made, Skylab's orbit couldn't be saved. The news about Skylab's impact dominated news headlines all around the world. The mass hysteria that had started prior to Skylab impacting in Australia had driven the world crazy. There were hats that people could order to warn them of a nanosecond in advance of Skylab hitting them on the head. The media frenzy blew everything out of proportion, and unfortunately the legacy of Skylab was lost in this media hype. And then, in 1979, the unthinkable happened.
Skylab Control, we here at the Johnson Space Center do not expect any further signal from Skylab. It is out of range of all the tracking stations, and it's on its final descent.
The town of Esperance is a beautiful little seaside resort that is largely unknown even today. In 1979, there were approximately 10,000 people living there, and so when Skylab hit, for them it was a huge deal. It put Esperance on the map.
One of the first major centres to report Skylab's fiery passage through the atmosphere was Esperance. There, residents told of being awakened just after midnight by a roaring sound and saw fiery globes spearing across the night sky.
Imagine, if you will, on the evening of July the 11th, people sitting here waiting the arrival of the debris of Skylab, which would have come in, flying over the town of Esperance, raining debris down all the way to Baladonia and further on to Rolina. It must have been a spectacular sight.
It got to the size of about a basketball, and I thought, this has got to be it. It's just too weird to be anything else. And then I realised that it was 17 tonnes approximately in weight, they said, and it looked to be coming straight at me. I thought, well, how do I dodge this? The only substantial protection I had was the tractor, so I dived in behind the dual wheels on the tractor, and I stuck my head out and watched this thing go up and over. And then I could see that it was going to go overhead, and just as it got to about, I don't know, 10 or so degrees from going over the top of me, it exploded in a massive fireball.
A little shed within the town of Esperance was quickly converted into a quasi-museum, and entrance for $1, people could see the debris of Skylab with good-natured Australian humour, dealing with the fact that a space station had just fallen on these people's heads. Another overnight celebrity was Stan Thornton, who was a teenager who discovered bits of Skylab in his backyard, and so at the drop of a hat he arranged to fly to San Francisco to visit the offices of the San Francisco Examiner to claim $10,000 for being the first person to show up with debris of Skylab. So Stan got on the plane, flew out to the United States, realised he didn't have a passport on him, so had to get the Australian authorities to help him through border control in the United States. He then went to the radio station and received his $10,000 for having verified pieces of Skylab. The Shire Council of Esperance in 1979, in a very tongue-in-cheek move, fined NASA $400 for littering. This fine remained unpaid over the decades, and in 2009, a radio station in the United States got wind of this and decided it was high time this fine get paid. So they organised a campaign and raised the $400, which was then subsequently paid in July of 2009 at the Esperance Museum. Now, it wasn't only Esperance, it was also Baladonia and Rolina. And when you look at a map, you can easily see where Skylab's debris would have landed following this straight line across Australia.
Of course, there was disappointment, but there's more of a sense of we understand the uncertainties, the variabilities of this problem. And so there was no real sense of failure in it. It was a sense of discovery.
The Museum of Esperance now houses the bulk of Skylab debris that was found in 1979. It is an experience to go and see relics of an outstanding space station that accomplished so much science for the world. Skylab is anything but a failure. It was a resounding success. Of course, there are other places like Balladonia or the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney, which have Skylab debris. But if you're thinking of going to Esperance, you ought to do yourself a favour and have a look at the museum in Esperance, which houses the largest collection of Skylab debris you will find on this planet. So thank you for joining me on this episode of Skylab. We hope to make more episodes of this nature, of really cool, obscure space history that hopefully will ignite your passion. If you're interested in further details about Skylab, check out our link below where you can find books on Skylab, the film Searching for Skylab, and heaps of other cool things that hopefully will get your passion fired up.